to begin with, but it it does get to the point where it's you really start fiending for social interaction outside of looking at computer screens and cell phones. Um,
Well, things are
and even
opening. Sorry, sorry.
no, like even then, like I have been doing like outreach at food banks and helping out with volunteering at food banks and things like anywhere with food distributions that I can get in contact with in San Bernardino, one in Riverside, but it's not necessarily the same as being able to hang out with friends and family and just have in-person meetings like normal.
Definitely. But things are opening back up now. So, I mean, are you happy about that? I mean, I guess that. Or how do you feel about the opening back up and people creeping back in? Because it seems like normalcy is starting to set in for especially a lot of Californians I'm seeing, and I don't know. How do you feel about it?
I'm not sure exactly, to be honest. Like I mean, the threat is still there. Not many people were I guess behaving as if um you had the virus, right? Like that was like the recommendation was to always act as if you had the possibility of transmitting it or you know
Right.
and that wasn't really that wasn't really flying too well in many places. In some places worse, where you had people protesting against the lockdown, which is ridiculous. Um,
Well, a certain kind of people protesting for the
mhm,
lockdown. Not to demonize anybody, but literally, and okay, kind of an elephant in the room. So,
yeah.
San Bernardino and the Black Lives Matter movement, like
Mhm.
from an activist, because I'm not an activist at all, right? So I'm inactive, I guess, as a person. Uh, I just have never been active in my local politics ever, and it just never occurred to me to like care about it until now, especially now that like I mean I don't know. To me, it just seems like we're seeing how much of a popularity contest it is to be president, and then we're seeing our own streets and our own areas and shit not look the way we want them to. I mean, especially like if you think downtown San Bernardino. So the point is like I don't know. It just feels like now more than ever, like at least in whatever way possible, I'll try to divert some energy towards this. But the movement that's going on now, right? I just got to ask you, like, how do you think San Bernardino is going to respond? Have they responded to the Black Lives Matter movement? And do you know much about a lot of what people are calling for? The defunding and the alternatives to policing. Do you know much about that? I mean, there's a couple questions there, but
Mhm.
yeah, you could just go in anywhere.
So one thing is there's a Rethink Public Safety Coalition within San Bernardino that's like a partnership between a lot of different nonprofit organizations. The one that I work for, ICUC or Inland Congregations United for Change included. Um, I think largely led by African American community members that are a part of COPE or Congregations Organized for Prophetic Engagement, which is another awesome organization that's been active in the area for about 20 years, if not a little bit more. And what their latest action happened last Tuesday, unless it was the Tuesday before. And it was specifically calling on San Bernardino Board of Supervisors, County Board of Supervisors to declare racism a public health emergency or crisis because it it's more so about the fabric of the systems of inequality and not even just inequality, inequity, and just racism in general, in terms of the culture of how police brutality and the systems that disproportionately target the Black community all over the United States have been. And that can go even even further because um, a huge percentage of the arrests that even happen around the areas that are considered the hood or the bad areas. But and people like to claim like, oh yeah, the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968 or the 1960s, but that doesn't mean that all the time prior and even since there was practices such as redlining where majority white neighborhoods were specifically created and designed so that people of color were pushed into specific projects or areas which are essentially the basis of the hoods. And that hasn't, like, the infrastructure of something like that isn't going to change overnight. And even over the course of 40 or 60 years, like the families that started there and or even have gotten pushed out or priced out are still being affected.
Well, to not be so bleak, what can, like, let me ask you, what can San Bernardino do? So, in declaring racism a public health crisis, what effectiveness does that do on the ground floor? Like, how does that change things? And also, like, I mean, is there any way that the city at the county level or at the city level that change can be affected so that you know people can feel more safe? Because here's the thing, personally, like, it's really real. I'll just give a very anecdotal sort of experience. I only feel really unsafe when I see police officers, and that's just because of treatment that's actually happened to my family, myself. I've been held at gunpoint just for literally smoking weed inside of a fucking like a neighborhood. So the point is, it's like when people are talking about defunding and transitioning into a different sort of alternative policing, what do you think? How do you think San Bernardino County would react to that sort of alternative? Like, because it's like people are looking for safety and that feeling of safety, and it's obvious that if people are getting arrested in disproportionately in some areas, and you definitely have a fear imposed on the public, seeming like maybe change should be had. But what do you think? How do you think San Bernardino is gonna respond to all of that? Because that's what's on the mind of the people right now.
I think more than that, it comes out to if they really move forward with defunding the police and really reinvesting those funds into different community programs and actually have community member involvement and engagement be at the forefront, because I think that's been a huge issue from the beginning, like in any circles. And this is coming from somebody that's been more or less actively engaged or as an activist in San Bernardino and tried different like alternative methods of trying to build communities through other venues like competitive video gaming and building communities based out of recreation as opposed to hardcore activism. But even then, I don't think I've been particularly effective. That's why, like, I took on the job of becoming a community organizer again through ICUC because I felt like I needed to relearn or learn really from the ground up how to really organize effectively, because I think I'm still struggling. And even then, like, I'm largely inactive on social media, but those are platforms that I should be using,
So
right?
do
Like
you?
any.
Sorry, do you
Mhm.
think that San Bernardino has like an organization problem? Just this whole area, like it's like there's a lot of great minds. There's a lot of minds that are fiery, that are firing off about the issues, but it's like organization of it. It seems like maybe that's the issue. You know what I mean? Because it's like presently seeing activism outside, at least to me, in the areas where I'm at, it's not common. I was in Riverside pretty much during the protests here in Riverside, and they only went on for about 3 days, but it definitely was not. like it was jarring, but it was beautiful to see. Like it was like so many people out and peaceful and not causing any sort of trouble. Um, the point I'm kind of trying to make is just like, well, it's a bunch of points, but really, do you think it's likely that we can organize in this area to make effective change? Like, and also, you know, you've said you've been experimenting with these alternative methods, and maybe they haven't been as effective. But are you looking towards, you know, any new ways to switch it up and bring it in? Because one way that I would think of is, you know, you say gaming, that's a good route. That's a good route. You've got community gaming sessions, but music, you know, I mean, you've got to integrate. I mean, music gets people into literally crowded and moving. And I mean, I just feel like, well, I mean, you know, I mean, I'm asking, is that so ICUC, is that, what do you guys do like as an organization? That's a better question.
I think ICUC, what it essentially boils down to is teaching people how to organize by like through the practice of organizing and getting people to essentially plan out specific steps and wants or needs, and then setting up meetings with specific community leaders or civic leaders, which means either city council members, mayor, city manager's office, city attorney's office, or even beyond that with
Governor.
assembly members and congress people specifically. Like I've been this last week, I was on a couple lobbying calls with Senator Connie Leyva and Assembly Member Eloise Reyes, though neither of them were actually on the call. It was their staff members because I guess that technically ends up being the default is um, it's difficult to reach them despite it being like part of coalitions with other like-minded organizations that are calling. Um, and then that also feels like a red flag, right? Like despite being able to set up these meetings, it's like more so like we're relegated to the staff. But also maybe that's a lack of education on my part in terms of what role specific staff members in assembly offices play. Because a lot of times people think, the assembly members themselves are the ones that are voting, but the people that are doing a lot of the reading and legislation work for them are actually the interns and staff members.
Hmm.
Um, and it's like,
We got to flood these staff members' like phones. Then got to flood.
yeah,
Oh, yeah, honestly, you have to be in contact with them. So when you
every
say like,
time there's legislation that our community needs, like for example, for housing right now, specifically for tenants, there's this legislation 8B 1436, which is protections in specifically related to COVID-19 for people that are renting
hmm,
and have either been laid off and um, haven't had the ability to really pay for rent, that are in fear of being evicted. Um, there hasn't been any hardcore legislation about specific protections and guidelines for how to handle that. It's just been the eviction moratorium saying, "Oh yeah, you can't be evicted so long as you let your landlord know in written, whether it's email or text, that you can't pay due to your income being affected by COVID-19 or the state's response to it with the closures." Um, and then the judicial council, which is the courts like all across the state, have stated that they're not going to be processing eviction cases until 90 days after the emergency is declared over, if it's related to COVID-19 income affecting rent. Um, but that doesn't help people because they're still responsible for paying all the back rent for those months. But if there's no income or very much reduced income, how are they going to come up with, instead of 1,200 or something? And that's like on the low end for a room in 1 month. Then how are they going to come up with four or five
how
times
much?
that much all at once?
So
Um,
so the bill in general, to sum it up, What is it proposed? The AB 14. What does it propose?
AB 1436. It proposes that the that not only can they not be evicted throughout the course of the eviction moratorium period, but also grants them 15 months to be able to pay back the back rent as their income
Hmm.
comes back to normalcy. And the thing is, I'm not even sure that's gonna be enough,
How
so
long
to
do you
speak.
how long do you think the COVID, I guess, I mean, because we're opening up as a state now, how long do you think that it's going to take until we're in full swing? And how large do you think the effects are to people? Because it seems like, I mean, I don't know anything about the economy, but the last thing I saw about it was that we're primed to do a rubber band thing where it's like things get better because of the down. I don't know, like it was something praising Trump or some shit like that, and it was like saying pretty much that the economy is going to start doing better after the pandemic. So it's like, what about that? I mean, are bills like AB 14, etc. Necessary, or what's going on?
Bills like that are necessary in order to just keep people from being massively evicted. Um, which I mean, some people might be in favor of it, some people might not be. Um, but housing itself has been an issue in California for a while, and we've actually lost more and more affordable housing units over the last 5 years, specifically in San Bernardino County, rather than gain them, which seems like it's really counterproductive to the need. Um,
More people, and there are more poor people. How are there less housing for them?
mhm.
Well,
But it might, and there's always been this, or the statistic was always thrown around that California always had an influx of people because everybody wants to live in California, um, or that's the narrative. But I think this last year it was actually the opposite, where there was more people leaving California than coming in, which is
really?
also arguable because if you're making decent money out here and you're actually able to save, then you could probably afford a bigger house in Arizona or any other state, or start a business somewhere else with that saved up money. Um, just because cost of living in California
It's
is
really high.
is extremely high, and it gets higher and higher by the minute, essentially. In terms of COVID, do I think that how long the effects are going to last is going to be? I think it's going to be longer than any like forecast or predictions for it, because it really comes down to individuals, and specifically those that are most affected, or those families most affected, and how they can afford, whether they can afford to keep socially distant. A lot of families um, that are working frontline jobs, or jobs that um, they can just hold on to, so that they don't end up in the crowd that can't afford rent or housing, is is huge, um, which is going to affect the numbers of people infected, or that
Let me
end up passing.
Let me ask you another question. In keeping socially distant and whatnot, the community garden that you do,
Hmm.
um, so tell me about that. It's like, how do you guys everything sanitized there, and how how does community, I guess, how does being active in the community um what role does that take inside of this post COVID world? How much more should we be doing that? How, like, and why? You know, yeah.
I think like the practice of having to be extra hygienical washing your hands regularly and wearing gloves for everything and not touching your face is going to be like the culture from now on. Or theoretically and ideally, it should be, and it should have been beforehand.
Right.
Um, and that's going to be especially prevalent
Bro.
in food banks and in places like the community garden, where a lot of the work is done like by hand, and you always end up washing your hands because of the dirt, or you're washing the produce because it needs to be washed anyway. um, there's that. But a lot of other practices and certain, and it depends on the environment, the work environment, everything, some things won't change. um, so there's going to be a percentage of people going back to normalcy as it was beforehand, and there's going to be a percentage of people and organizations and workplaces or corporations that aren't, that it's just as soon as everything. Wait, which one did I state first? That they were going to go back to normal, or that they weren't? Because
Well, you said that some people are going to be going back to normal.
yeah, some people are still just going to be extra cautious and are actually going to withhold from
How did you guys do
spending
that?
money on the same level.
How did you guys do that at the community garden?
At the community garden, it was literally everybody was assigned a different row to pick, and then when washing time came, everybody was essentially still like washing out of the same sink or wheelbarrow for like all the produce. And then after that, it gets handled by another person with gloves.
And are you guys having more of these, or is it just a one and done? Or
No, that particular organization, Huerta del Valle, is starting a community garden in San Bernardino, but it hasn't. It essentially got stalled because of COVID, keeping meetings from happening. So it was in the pre-planning stages where the goal, or their method of creating community gardens, is through community involvement, and they're the ones that vote and decide what the community values are for the garden, and what the layout of the garden is going to look like. um, so I haven't seen their Yoruba Valley one, because the Ontario one is their first one that started, I think, maybe 6 to 10 years ago.
okay,
And then they had one in Yoruba Valley that's a little bit younger, and San Bernardino's is essentially still like unborn,
unborn.
because all that's happened is a few community meetings to set up those guidelines and lay out the map of what it's supposed to be, but there hasn't been as much. And then laying out specific groundwork for a section of community garden plots, and laying the fence.
So they're
So
gonna
that,
be continuing to just, I guess, build it in the future, right? So that the next time it'll be up and running complete.
yeah, the next steps is anybody in the community who's willing to volunteer, come out when they are working on the on the pipe work for the water, and creating the the area where the accessible water is going to be, so that they can lay out the irrigation systems. And then once the water is up and running, then it's up to everybody who's willing to come out and start
Planting.
mulching the land and getting the earth essentially ready for planting, because um, you always have to check to see what the condition of the soil is first, because oftentimes the soil ends up depleted by the weeds and things that grow. So you want to make sure it has like the nutritional, or
So how long does all of that take? Well, how long will that take to get it up? You know, for where people are planting. When do you think that'll be?
I think planting
Mulches
probably
down
won't
and
happen
everything.
until at like August, July or August at the earliest.
Wow. Well, but how important is this community activity to the times we're in? You know, like, what can you say about the need for this? Is it just a thing that, I mean, like, honestly, like, how much should we want to eliminate factory farming? Is it really that serious? And then also, to like, well, yeah, just is yeah, is it? Is it?
In my opinion, I think the more any individual can learn to become self-sustaining and grow their own food, the less they're gonna have to buy into systems of factory farming or corporations in general. It'll be healthier to be out in the sun and physically active. There's scientific reports proven that state that by somebody either being barefooted on ground on soil or to actually just handle soil with your hands, it's like an antidepressant, and it's grounding because of the nutrients in the soil and the composition. um, so
So
that's
that's science behind being a tree hugger. Okay, cool.
yeah, science. There's science behind being a tree hugger, but I think it's more important in terms of learning like how to get your own food and how to create the conditions so that you can grow and create your own food and become self-sustaining, or learn how much land you need to be able to go with minimizing the amount of food costs that you end up spending. um,
But sorry to kind of bring it back around to the issues, especially going on in the country right now a little bit. It's like, we're talking about being self-sustaining. We're talking about, you know, not going towards corporations systems. Um, can you just give a button on how do you feel it would look like if San Bernardino really did start to defund the police, invest into communities of color or just the community, and transition into a more community-based law system? What do you think it looks like, and do you think it's feasible for this area to do like that?
I think it's necessary in terms of just how much funding is taken from the San Bernardino General Fund. Like, I wish I was on my computer to send you the graphs on just how much the police department funding proportionally gets to everything else.
Is it in the
Um,
hundreds of millions?
yeah,
Really?
it's it's in definitely, and in terms of whatever San Bernardino's total budget is capable of, the vast majority goes to police department. And I think, well, I mean, that's a
Hmm.
common trend among various cities. And there's
Hmm.
like memes going around, or I read somewhere that it was like, it might have been somebody within my own friends group that wrote that cities' budgets are essentially police departments and a bunch of underfunded social services.
That's that is that really is terrible. So it's like a pie chart of just like all blue, and then it's just like like education. Oh, what else? Housing. What else even
It's
goes
true.
there?
And then even at a national
Civil.
level, that's what our military budget is. It's it's I wouldn't say
True.
it's identical, but it's proportionally accurate. Um,
We would have to see the numbers on that.
yeah,
I mean, I'm taking your word for it, but
yeah, I
and
need
and
to do some
from
of the
what I can
research.
see, shit, like the cops, they've got the newest SUVs, the newest cars, the newest this and that. I literally in Ontario, I've seen SWAT police bust up my entire fucking studio, drag me out with a drone of all things, an entire situation. That had nothing to do with me. A warrant was laid at this place, and yeah, they used a fucking drone. Guys with assault rifles, like it's all types of shit, Call of Duty shit. But yeah, yeah. So, but the investing that they do to the communities, right? What does that look like? Say that. What does that look like?
What does it look like right now, or
Five
what it
years.
should look like in 5 years? Man, in 5 years, the way I would see it would be community gardens in every neighborhood, not just in one specific area of the whole city, but basically every block, especially those that are in food deserts next to apartment complexes, having
Hmm.
gardens so that people from those apartment complexes could grow their own food or start to at least learn how to grow their own food, and have people bring out experts to do workshops at each of those locations and teach people, and then have like maybe some actual grants and programs to help start creating new agricultural farms like that are local. And maybe, well, what also should happen is essentially in every school they should have something like that, but additionally teach people specifically how to navigate the political system. um, they tend to gloss over it and teach like the whitewashed history version of American government in the schools. But how do we actually teach people how to use those systems and actually like voice their opinion and get their power out of it? Because we're the ones that put them in office, and we could always vote somebody out and put somebody else in.
Right.
But even when we do have somebody in office, how do we
Ciao.
reach out and have the confidence to be like, hey, my community needs this, how do we get that? And not just like consider voting as a one and done deal, because voting is just the first step, but also teaching people how to be financially sustainable. How do we how do we get programs where people can build their own houses, right? Why should somebody go into a 30-year mortgage debt to buy a rickety old falling apart house for $300,000 in San Bernardino? Why can't we build our own sustainable, like, housing? What do you call it? New and more sustainable housing models, like Cal Earth domes or tiny homes, and really get people to cut back on the corporate spending. Because,
What about the
I mean,
policing? A lot of that sounds literally like exactly what we need, but an elephant in the room. The dealing of issues one person to the next. You know, the question, and I lob it to you because you're an activist, but it's like, and I don't expect you to have the answer, but what have you heard? What developments are people making towards that? Because it's the one question that I hear the opposition ask, if you could call them that. But it's the one question. It's like, okay, well, who's dealing with the murder investigations and the rapists, especially? And we haven't even touched prison at all. And I don't want to delve too deep there. But you know, what about the police? What is 5 years funding? And yes, community gardens in every neighborhood and smaller homes, more equitable people. Crime is still present though, at some level. It will look. I mean,
yes, it
look
will.
at our homeless problem. I mean, gee, what
One would
answers
be
are people
also
coming up with?
investing in those programs, right? Like, how do you actually tackle the mental health of homeless people and people that are incarcerated, and get them to a point where they have as close to an actual clean slate, and in reintegrating into society? Because those programs aren't existent right now, or the way that they're handled is in a kind of revolving door method, where somebody's released. Oh, we're not going to hire you because there's discriminatory practices against people that are formerly incarcerated, even if they are trying to turn their lives around.
Hmm.
So then they have no other choice to feed their families or get any financial source of income without going back into those habits. And it's tough, and I don't have all the answers, and I wish I did.
Yeah.
Um,
No, and you shouldn't, you know. But
and I
it
and I
is.
think
These are
that
the
really
things to
comes
think
down
about.
to. I think it also comes down to getting those people that are in those situations to be part of the planning and decision making. Because if it's just somebody from the outside making the decisions for them, then that's not really transformative.
Especially
And
felons. Yeah.
that's the
Speaking.
core that's the core principle to organizing, is the people closest to the pain are the ones whose opinion really matters the most when it comes to handling it.
Hmm.
Like if we don't include them in the conversations and make them like the leaders, so to speak, on it, like who's an expert in coming out of jail and not being able to find a job other than the person who's really experiencing it. Anybody else can read a book about it, but when
To
you
live
really
that.
to
Yeah.
really live through that trauma, right? Like it doesn't make sense to speak on behalf of somebody else whose experience is invalidated by the act of speaking for them.
Explain that. Go.
Like like saying I if I'm somebody that goes up to city council or sets up a meeting with assembly members and says, I think the homeless people need this, this, and this, right? But I've never been homeless in my life, and I don't know what parallels to compare that to other than to say they need these specific services, or they need you guys to just give them the Succumbi Lake Park and let them create a
I see.
community out of it. Um, if I don't have people who are either currently homeless or formerly homeless in that conversation with me, then my opinion doesn't really carry the weight that it should.
Should. Or and especially the opinion that you may think it will have. I mean, that's how people start to not. I mean, there's a it's like kind of a meme at this point, but mansplaining, but like to anything. Um. Hmm. Wow.
Yeah, it's not
Okay.
authentic at that point.
Very contrived. Very forced. And eventually, probably malicious towards the group that you're speaking for. Like yeah. But and okay. And I don't want to press you for the answers, but that those are the conversation. These are the conversations that I want to start having with people, and especially as we move towards whatever we're moving towards post COVID, post pretty much like protests and everything going on after George Floyd. Um, I'm trying to make sense of everything, so that's why I'm talking to people that I think are smart right now. Christian, you are like the first person I've had on a Zoom meeting, so I want to thank you for coming on. Seriously, um,
No
appreciate it.
problem.
Appreciate your perspective. Uh, so okay, in general, can you just give like out what your titles are and kind of what you do for your community and whatever else you want to broadcast out, and then after that, I think we'll just wrap it up.
Yeah, so my credentials, I'm currently an inactive San Bernardino Generation Now member, which is a community activism group that spun off of what was originally also an ICUC, Young Adults Local Organizing Committee, that decided they wanted to break off from the nonprofit and start another group or club that wasn't a nonprofit to be able to have opinions on politics that nonprofits have their hands tied because of their 501c3 status. Like they can't endorse specific
Corporate.
candidates.
Ah,
um, they can endorse or donate to specific candidates that are running for political offices. They can back a platform like a specific like education or police reform platform, but they can't specifically support a specific candidate if they are like a champion of that.
Even if the entire contents, their whole member, like all the members inside, support that, whatever it is that. Okay, so you're a part of SPGen now.
Yep. From there, I used to organize. I built up a competitive Super Smash Brothers Melee community through regular tournaments over the course of a 3.5 year period in
Wow.
San Bernardino. In a effort towards having a project that brings in funding in terms of like the economy from outside competitors outside of the city of San Bernardino that might otherwise not ever come to San Bernardino and spend that money. So that was to learn in terms of like how event organizing has a small effect on economies. And lately, I've been um, as of the last 7 months, I've been working for Inland Congregations United for Change as a community
ICUC.
organizer with a focus on housing. So for that, my my essential tasks are to become an expert in housing issues and the legislation and everything surrounding it, so
Hmm.
that over the course of the next 5 years I could like implement changes to local policies and ordinances for land use and things like that within the city. But for that, I need to start building a base, which I have started, but I think it'll be easier once I can legitimately um, non-COVID social distancing, really walk the streets in the hoods that need it the most. Because I don't know how accurate or not it might be that a lot of other organizations maybe don't do that because we keep seeing a lack of community involvement in a lot of the decisions that are being made. Um, Lately, I've been going to food banks and talking to people that need the food assistance and asking if they're also dealing with housing issues so that I can follow up with them and try to connect them to the few resources that we do have, either for through other organizations that do direct services in San Bernardino with eviction prevention or maybe bill assistance
Build
to help
assistance.
offset, yeah, like utility bill assistance and things like that, or
Bill assistance. Hmm.
or
I didn't know that was a
programs.
thing.
Yeah, it's like it's only
When you're dire
for
situations.
yeah, only for dire situations, and I think you can only do it once every year and a half or something
Oh
like
my
that,
god.
once every 18 months through a local nonprofit organization called Community Action Partnership, which is a huge community partner, and they also do the eviction prevention. They also help supply like donated products and things for community events where there will be distributions,
You want to put out
like
their name again? What was that?
Community Action Partnership,
Huh.
CAP,
Yep.
SBC, because they're part of San Bernardino County's repertoire of community organizations.
The pack that San Bernardino generation now separated from, right?
No, ICUC is the one that SPJ now separated from.
Oh, so
So
ICUC has ties that it cannot break, essentially, with other corporations, etc. That it was like a long code. I'm never gonna remember that, but I remember what you said. And then this other CAP, Community Action
partnership.
Partnership, is connected to San Bernardino's own coalition of community-driven programs.
The actual county's programs.
And okay, so oh wow, okay. How would you rate San Bernardino's? I guess they're that branch of that coalition of activism, just general. How would you rate that out of 10 or a letter grade?
I would give them what would I give them? I would give them a an 8. Um,
A or 8?
8.
Hmm.
8 out of 10. Um, because they do. The thing that sucks is though everything relies on networking, right? Like a lot of these community programs won't show up to the communities unless another organization that's closer to the ground um, sets up an event or something, or does the work to build up the lists of people with the needs. um, so I don't think on its own it has as much power as it really relies on the network of other organizations that are closest to the people in the community and that are actually building the relationships with community members. Because if that piece wasn't there, then
They would have no connection to people.
yeah.
So organizations like who help this San Bernardino coalition, like Gen Now, I guess others. And I'm sorry.
ICUC and Cope. I think Gen Now is, for now, like the role Gen Now plays is um, just redistributing information for the masses to connect. Um, and then if there's anybody that wants to get further involved, then they kind of bridge them to the organizations. ICUC does things similarly. However, the vast majority of ICUC's work revolves around congregations or religious, what do you call them, like churches in the
Okay.
community, because those are a community space that are still, or at least up until recently with COVID, were a place where many people still gathered and had a sense of community based on their faith. COPE does that similarly as well. So we go to the different churches. We ask the clergy leaders, hey, can we make an announcement for this particular program, or to make sure people are actively participating in census, or getting registered to vote or voting, and then following up with people, like bringing computers, like, oh, if you guys need help filling out the census, we're going to have people here helping you out with laptops.
So I guess ICUC's entire work is kind of slowed down with COVID. I mean, you've referenced that a bunch. I
Yep.
mean, with things coming back though, when do you expect to be back out on the streets, surveying for housing, going to churches, doing everything?
Honestly,
Because I mean, people are going outside.
Tuesday.
Okay. Hey,
Honestly,
people are
no,
going
yeah,
outside.
Tuesday.
People are
Because
going
I've
outside.
been outside in the food banks, but even then, I don't think it's as effective as straight up going into apartment complexes and talking to people straight up. Like, and then like giving out flyers isn't as useful as you straight up telling somebody, hey, give me your number. Let me send you a text so you have my information and who I work with, and then I'll give you a call.
Or newsletter.
Hmm.
Oh, Tuesday. Well, good luck on the outside, on the ground. Stay safe.
Hmm.
Um, thank you for talking to me again. And yeah, is there anything else you want to like let the people know like before we get off? Any like anything?
I would say, yeah, voting's just the first step of being civically active. The real work comes after, and it's easy to get discouraged now more than ever. I mean, I'm a skeptic myself, um, and just like use whatever platforms possible to get helpful information, or even just ask anybody within your circles if they need anything, if they're okay.
That's a very human. Hey, I like that. Thank you, Christian or Chris?
Uh,
Either.
Whichever. Yeah, I don't mind.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on. I'm gonna end the recording right now. That's the
Mhm.
Rambling Rogue Show. It's been a very serious episode, but Christian Flores, he helped me pretty much bridge a lot of these weird conversations that we need to have. and I really appreciate him for that. So that's it, and I'm out of here. Peace.